Part 2 of Security by Powell Anderson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Greg Marguerite. Part 2 of Security by Powell Anderson. She laughed and clapped his shoulder. You know, Alan, there are times when I think you're human after all. Thanks. He grinned wryly. How about having a beer with me now, to celebrate? Why, sure. They went down to the shop. A cooler of beer was there, its contents being reckoned as among the essential supplies brought from Earth by Jessup. Lancaster uncapped 2 bottles, and he and Karen sat down on a bench, swinging their legs and looking over the silent waiting machines. Most of the station personnel were off duty now, in the arbitrary night. He sighed at last. I like it here. I'm glad you do, Alan. It's a funny place, but I like it. The station and all its wacky inhabitants, they're heterodox as the very devil, and would have trouble getting a dog catcher's job back home. But they're all refreshing. Lancaster snapped his fingers. Say, that's it. That's why you're all out here. The government needs your talents, and you aren't quite trusted, so you're put here out of range of spies, right? Do you have to see a rebel with notebook in hand under every bed? She asked with a hint of weariness. The First Amendment hasn't been repealed yet, they say. Theoretically, we're all entitled to our own opinions. Okay, I won't argue politics. Tell me about some of the people here, will you? They're an odd bunch. I can't tell you much, Alan. That's where security does apply. Isaacson is a Martian colonist. You've probably guessed that already. Jessup lost his hand in a fight with some enemies once. The Dufresnes had a son who was killed in the Moroccan incident. Lancaster remembered that affair had involved American power used to crush a French spy ring centered in North Africa. Sovereignty had to be brushed aside, but damn it, you had to preserve the status quo for your own survival, if nothing else. Huang had to go into exile when the Chinese government changed hands a few years back. Yes? He asked her when her voice faded out. Oh, I might as well tell you. My husband and I lived in America after our marriage. He was a good biotechnician and had a job with one of the big pharmaceutical companies. Only he went to camp. Later he died or was shot. I don't know which. Her words were flat. That's a shame, he said inadequately. The funny part of it is, he wasn't engaged in treason at all. He was quite satisfied with things as they were. Oh, he talked a little, but so does everybody. I imagine some rival or enemy put the finger on him. Those things happen, said Lancaster. It's too bad, but they happen. They're bound to occur in a police state, she said. Sorry, we weren't going to argue politics, were we? I never said the world was perfect, Karen. Far from it. Only what alternative have we got? Any change is likely to be so dangerous that, well, man can't afford mistakes. No, he can't. But I wonder if he isn't making one right now. Oh, well, give me another beer. They talked on indifferent subjects till Karen said it was her bedtime. Lancaster escorted her to her apartment. She looked at him curiously as he said good night, and then went inside and closed the door. Lancaster had trouble getting to sleep. The corrected equations provided an adequate theory of superdielectricity, a theory with tantalizing hints about still other phenomena, and gave the research team a precise idea of what they wanted in the way of crystal structure. Actually, the substance to be formed was only semi-crystalline, with plastic features as well, all interwoven with a grid of carbon-linked atoms. Now the trick was to produce that stuff. Calculation revealed what elements would be needed and what spatial arrangement. Only, how did you get the atoms to assume the required configuration and hook up in the right way? Theory would get you only so far. Thereafter it was cut and try. Lancaster rolled up his sleeves with the rest and let Karen take over the leadership. She was the best experimenter. He spent some glorious and all but sleepless weeks, greasy, dirty, living in a jungle of haywired apparatus with a restless slide rule. There were plenty of failures, a lot of heartbreak and profanity, an occasional injury, but they kept going, and they got there. The day came, or was it night, when Karen took a slab of darkly shining substance out of the furnace where it had been heat aging. Rakan sawed it into several chunks for testing. It was Lancaster who worked on the electric properties. He applied voltage till his generator groaned, and watched in awe as meters climbed and climbed without any sign of stopping. He discharged the accumulated energy in a single blue flare that filled the lab with thunder and ozone. He tested for a time lag of an electric signal and wondered wildly if it didn't feel like sleeping on its weary path. The reports came in, excited yells from one end of the long cluttered room to the other, exultant whoops and men pounding each other on the back. This was it. This was the treasure at the rainbow's end. The substance and its properties were physically and chemically stable over a temperature range of hundreds of degrees. The breakdown voltage was up in the millions. The insulation resistance was better than the best known to Earth's science. The dielectric constant could be varied at will by a simple electric field normal to the applied voltage gradient, a field which could be generated by a couple of dry cells if need be, and ranged from 100,000 to about 3 billion. For all practical purposes, here was the ultimate dielectric. "We did it!" Frederick slapped Lancaster's back till it felt that the ribs must crack. "We have it!" "Whoopee!" yelled Karen. Suddenly they had joined hands and were dancing idiotically around the induction furnace. Lancaster clasped Rakan's talons without caring that it was a Martian. They sang then, sang till heads appeared at the door and the glassware shivered. "Here we go round the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush, the mulberry bush." It called for a celebration. The end of a project meant no more than filling a last report and waiting for the next assignment, but they ran things differently out here. Somebody broke out a case of Venusian agua caliente. Somebody else led the way to a storeroom, tossed its contents into the hall, and festooned it with used computer tape. Rakan forgot his Martian dignity and fiddled for a square dance, with Isaacson doing the calling. The folk from the other end of the station swarmed in till the place overflowed. It was quite a party. Hours later, Lancaster was hazily aware of lying stretched on the floor. His head was in Karen's lap and she was stroking his hair. The hardy survivors were following the Dufreres in French drinking songs, which are the best in the known universe. Rakan's fiddle wove in and out, a lovely accompaniment to voices that were untrained but made rich and alive by triumph. Ser multom jivu quon scriva, ici l'héroe de Bouver. Ser multom jivu quon scriva, ici l'héroe de Bouver. Ici, oui, 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 ici, non, non, non. Lancaster knew that he had never been really happy before. Berg showed up a couple of days later looking worried. Lancaster's vacation time was almost up. When he heard the news, his eyes snapped gleefully and he pumped the physicist's hand. "Good work, boy." "There are things to clean up yet," said Lancaster, "but it's all detail. Anybody can do it." "And the material? What do you call it, anyway?" Karen grinned. "So far, we've only named it FUTS," she said. "That's stuff spelled backward." Okay. Is it easy to manufacture?" "Sure. Now that we know how, anybody can make it in his own home, if he's handy at tinkering apparatus together." Fine. Just what was needed. This is the ticket." Berg turned back to Lancaster. "Okay, boy, you can pack now. We blast again in a few hours." The physicist shuffled his feet. "What are my chances of getting reassigned back here?" he asked. "I've liked it immensely, and now that I know about it anyway—" I'll see. But remember, this is top secret. You go back to your regular job and don't say a word on this to anyone less than the president, no matter what happens. Understand?" "Of course," snapped Lancaster, irritated. "I know my duty." "Yeah, so you do," Berg said. "So you do." Leave-taking was tough for all concerned. They had grown fond of the quiet, bashful man. And as for him, he wondered how he'd get along among normal people. These were his sort. Karen wept openly and kissed him good by with a fervor that haunted his dreams